بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه إلى يوم الدين والتعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع الانتفاع والإفادة الاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتابنا وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة إلى الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته قربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله أكبر لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. عدد كل حرف كتب واكتب أبدا العابدين ودهر الداهرين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو أزل وأظلم وأجهل وأجهل علي. اللهم أغننا بالعلم وزدنا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. طيب, Allah Ta'ala is the legislator of humanity. He is the one who sent the Prophet ﷺ to tell humankind the rulings that they need to know to live a life in this world that is pleasing to Him and ultimately leads to success in the next life. These legislations from Allah Ta'ala attract all benefit to an individual and repel from them all harm, whether they are its benefit and harm that is worldly or associated with the next life. So for example, He commands us to not commit crimes, to not steal, to not murder, and all these things. Why? Because it leads society to discord, it's oppression, it's wrong. Okay? So it has a benefit in this life if we were to follow these rules, and it has a benefit in the next life. Because in the next life, you are staying away from that which is offensive to Allah Ta'ala, that which He does not like, which leads to what? You having good deeds and ultimately attaining entrance into heaven. So Allah is a legislator, and everything He legislates attracts good to an individual in this world and the next world, and repels harm from them in this world and the next world. طيب, every single thing He legislates, everything He commanded the Prophet ﷺ tell us about in terms of rulings, okay, they're going to be, for the most part, restricted to 5 different rulings. Either it's going to be something that's obligatory for humanity to perform. So for example, He commanded us to pray 5 times a day. He commanded us to fast Ramadan. He commanded us to pay zakah if we fulfill certain conditions. He commanded us to make hajj if we're able to. He commanded us to be good spouses. He commanded us to be good children to our parents, to be good parents to our children, to be good neighbors, to not offend or to harm anyone of our fellow Muslims. Okay? So these are commandments He gave us that we have to do. If someone doesn't do it, they are sinful. And when they do it, they garner reward. They get rewarded. Some of the commandments He gave, they are recommended actions. If you do it, you get rewarded. If you don't do it, you don't get sin. For example, praying the Sunnah prayers before Maghrib and after Maghrib, before Dhuhr and after Dhuhr, before Isha and after Isha. Okay? Praying witr, fasting extra days, giving charity at any time outside of zakah. All these things are recommended actions that if one does, they get rewarded. If they don't do it, they don't accrue sin. Some actions are just neutral, no reward and no sin, such as just sitting in your living room doing nothing, or drinking some water, or having dinner. Okay? Some actions are disliked, meaning that if you were to do it, you don't get sin. But if you were to leave it for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, what happens? You get reward because He dislikes it. He doesn't want you to do it, but it's not a strong dislike. These are actions that are called makruh. These are actions that are called makruh. Then there are actions that are completely prohibited. Actions that if you were to do them, Allah, He commanded us to leave them, very strong and firm commands. If you were to do them, you are sinful. If you were to leave them, you're rewarded. Actions such as, for example, the obvious ones like stealing, committing crimes, such as that, adultery, murder, interest-bearing loans, for example, is haram. Okay, many different things. All right. Those are the 5 general rulings where the legislation of Allah Ta'ala falls under. Furthermore, some of these rulings are done in a way or relayed in a way where the person performing them is important. And for some of these rulings, what's important is just the action being done, regardless of who does it. So Allah Ta'ala, as we all know, He created humanity and put them on earth to be tested. Okay? He created humanity and put them on earth, and their time on earth is a test. Their time on earth is a test. So as a test to humanity, He commanded them to do certain things and to leave certain things. You have to pray 5 times a day, fast in Ramadan, stay away from, for example, meat that is not slaughtered properly, stay away from haram food, stay away from inappropriate relationships with the opposite gender, stay away from this, stay away from that, do this, do that. The things you must do and things you cannot do. Okay? These things fall under a category of rulings that are specific to an individual, meaning they must be performed by someone specific. Okay? Sometimes this person who has to perform them could be any one of the ummah. And sometimes they are people who meet specific criteria, and sometimes it's just a specific individual. So, in terms of what's considered wajib or obligatory or farḍ, we have what's called farḍ ayn, which is where Allah Ta'ala commands the ummah to do something, and He wants that commandment fulfilled by someone specific. Sometimes this individual who must perform it can be is many in the ummah, like every single person has to do it, or most people have to do it. For example, right, praying 5 times a day. Almost every single Muslim, right, so long as they're Muslim, they've reached puberty, and they're of sound mind, you have to pray. Every single person has to pray, right? Every single person have to pray. For example, if Abdullah doesn't pray, I can't pray on his behalf, right? I can't pray on his behalf. Why? Because Allah wants Abdullah to pray, and He wants Uzair to pray, and He wants Malik to pray, and He wants so-and-so to pray. He wants the action to be done by a specific individual. It just so happens that this specific action has to be done by everybody, right? By everybody who is Muslim, of sound mind, and has reached puberty. This is called farḍ ayn. Everyone has to do it. I can't do it for you. Someone else can't do it for you. Sometimes, something that is farḍ ayn is only for people who meet a specific criteria. For example, it's farḍ ayn to teach your children, right, the deen and to raise them well. Well, what if you don't have children? Well, it's not obligatory upon you, obviously, right, because you don't have children. Or it can be a farḍ ayn, for example, obligatory personal obligation upon someone to, for example, be good to their neighbors. Well, what if someone doesn't have any neighbors? They live in the middle of the woods, right? There's no one around for miles, okay? So what's personally obligatory, what's farḍ ayn, is something that Allah commands someone to do, and they want that specific person to do it. No one else can do it on their behalf. No one else can pray for you. No one else can fast for you. He asked you to do it, and you have to do it yourself. Some actions that are farḍ ayn are obligatory on specific individual, such as the Prophet ﷺ, it was obligatory upon him to pray in the depths of the night, in the middle of the night. Okay? It was obligatory upon him, because he was the Prophet ﷺ, to pray qiyam al-layl. And so, we see farḍ ayn is what? It's when Allah Ta'ala legislates something that is obligatory. He wants it to be performed, but to be performed by a specific individual. Whether that person is almost everyone in the ummah, or people who meet a specific criteria, or just one specific individual, like the case of the Prophet ﷺ and qiyam al-layl. And so, farḍ ayn is what? It is when Allah Ta'ala wants something to be done by someone specific. No one else can do it on their behalf. No one else can do it on their behalf. That is farḍ ayn. Then we have a category that is called farḍ kifāya. We have what's commonly translated as a communal obligation. A communal obligation. This is different than farḍ ayn. Farḍ ayn was legislated by Allah Ta'ala. Why? Because He is testing the individuals of this ummah. He is testing the individuals of humanity, right? That's why He's asking you specifically to do something. You specifically to do something. If someone else can do it for you, it's not a test anymore, right? It's not a test anymore. So it's something that you have to do specifically because it's a test from Allah Ta'ala. It is a test from Allah Ta'ala. طيب, farḍ kifāya is a communal obligation. Farḍ kifāya is a communal obligation. What does that mean? There are certain things that just have to be done, okay? There are certain things that have to be done in order for the religion of Islam to flourish on the face of the earth. There are certain things that have to be done so that people's worldly affairs can be ordered and structured and they can prosper as well on the face of the earth. Now, if someone's dunyawi affairs, the worldly affairs of humanity aren't in order, it's very difficult to ask for them to make sure their religious affairs are in order. Okay? If people are struggling, for example, to put clothes on their back, to put food on the table, if they're struggling to find safe, secure shelter, right? In those kind of scenarios, if things were just chaos, it's difficult to ask them to pray 5 times a day in a masjid, for example, right? To come together, 40 people, and have Jum'ah, for example. So the success of deen relies upon people's worldly affairs being structured in a specific way. And for deen to flourish, we also need to make sure that certain things get done, okay? Certain things get done. So Allah Ta'ala, there's a category of rulings called the communal obligations, Farḍ, Kifāya. These things are legislated by God, not to test humanity, but rather to make sure their worldly and religious affairs are structured and flourishing. Their worldly and religious affairs are structured and flourishing. Because of that, it doesn't matter who does it. It doesn't matter who performs these actions. What's important is that they just get done. What's important is that they just get done. If I tell you, for example, here in Makanji, we need a hospital. We just need one, right? There's a lot of people get sick, we need doctors, we need a building, we need someone to build a hospital, okay? Does it matter whether I do it, or you do it, or he does it, or she does it? Doesn't matter. As long as the hospital's built, things are going to be fine in Makanji. Doesn't matter who does it. So, Farḍ Kifāya is just that. It's legislation from Allah Ta'ala that He sent on the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ that needs to get done for people's worldly and religious affairs to be structured and to be conducive to a successful afterlife. It doesn't matter who does it, but it just needs to get done. Okay? So we said Farḍ Ayn, you have to do it, no one else can do it for you. If you neglect a Farḍ Ayn, what happens? You are sinful, right? If someone doesn't pray Maghrib or Isha, what happens? You're sinful, right? You're sinful. You gotta make up your prayer. Okay? Now, if you neglect a Farḍ Kifāya, what's the ruling? As long as someone in the community does it, okay, the entire community is considered not sinful, and that action is considered to have been completed. So for example, going back to Makanji, right? The community of Makanji needs to build a hospital, for example, or needs to build a masjid, for example, okay? Or needs to build an Islamic school, for example, okay? In all these cases, these are things that we need as a what? For the community here to prosper in terms of our worldly affairs, like the hospital, or roads, for example, or professions like doctors being around, or in terms of our religious affairs, a masjid, an Islamic school, a seminary, right? Things like that. So all these things need to get done, but it doesn't really matter who does it. It just needs to get done. As long as one person builds that masjid, or builds that hospital, or builds that Islamic school, no matter who it is, as long as it gets done, what happens? Everyone in the community, right, is absolved from that action. Meaning it's no longer demanded from them. Okay? The person who gets rewarded for doing it, though, is who? Is that guy. The guy that actually did it. Okay? Now let's imagine no one does it. Neglected. Society has neglected building the hospital, or the road, or the masjid, or the Islamic school, or the seminary, or whatever it was we're talking about. Okay? What happens now? Every single person in the community is sinful. Every single person is sinful. Okay? Now you might ask, well, didn't we say earlier that Allah doesn't care who does it? That's true. He doesn't care who does it, right? But you need someone to do something if you want things to get done, right? If Allah is asking you to build a hospital, someone has to actually come and build it, right? So as a way of encouragement and to and to also reduce the chances of neglect. What happens if that thing is not done by anyone? Everyone is sinful. Everyone is sinful. Okay? So in Farḍ Kifāya, the person who performs the action gets rewarded. And if it's neglected, every single person in the community is sinful. That is the major difference between Farḍ Kifāya and Farḍ Ayn. Farḍ Ayn is a personal obligation. No one else can do it on your behalf. And Farḍ Kifāya is a communal obligation. Okay? As long as one person does it, the entire community is absolved. No one else has to do anything. If it's neglected, every single person is sinful. Okay? Farḍ Ayn is also legislated as a means of testing humanity. Farḍ Kifāya is legislated, why? To make sure the community, to make sure their worldly and their religious affairs are running smoothly. They're running a way that is conducive to a successful afterlife, a successful life in this world and felicity in the next. طيب. So what are some examples of Farḍ Ayn and Farḍ Kifāya? So Farḍ Ayn, we know what Farḍ Ayn is, right? Most of us, the things that come to our mind when we think of obligations are what's considered Farḍ Ayn. Praying 5 times a day, fasting in Ramadan, paying zakah if you meet the conditions, going on hajj if you're able to, being a good spouse, being a good child to your parents, being a good parent to your children, being a good neighbor, okay, making sure your heart is pure, you don't have any vices in your heart, you don't have jealousy of other Muslims, you don't have malice toward other Muslims, you don't bother the believers. All these things are personal obligations, and no one else can do them for you. Allah is asking every single Muslim to do these things as a way of testing them, right? If you neglect them, you individually are sinful. If you do them, you get the reward, right? But what about Farḍ Kifāya? So Farḍ Kifāya, we said, they are related to worldly affairs and religious affairs. Let's look at religious affairs first. For example, Salatul Janazah. Salatul Janazah. A Muslim passes away, or someone in society passes away, right? Even if they're not Muslim, right? They pass away, okay? Like, what does the community have to do with this person? If it's a Muslim who passes away, someone has to go and wash them, and shroud them, and pray over them, and bury them. All these things are what? Communal obligations. It just has to get done. Okay? It just has to get done. If no one does it, then the entire community is sinful. As long as one person washes that deceased individual, shrouds the deceased individual, prays over them and buries them, khalas, they get rewarded, yeah, but the entire community owes them for that, right? They put the team on their back. They put the team on their back and they did one for the community. Tamam? Another example is Jama'ah. To manifest the congregational prayer to the community is also a communal obligation. What does that mean? That means that it's well known that there's a congregation, a Jama'ah for Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha in this community. It's situated in a way that anyone from around the town or the city, they can get to if they want to. It means you have to have more than one if it's a really big town. Like Albertus is really small. One is probably enough. Allentown's a lot bigger. You probably need more than one. New York City is huge. You need a lot more. So you need to make sure that the Jama'ah, the congregational prayer, is known and established. Anyone from the community who wants to come to it, they're able to. You don't just have it in the basement. Don't tell anyone. Lock the door. Close the windows. The shutters are shut as well. Khalas, no one knows, but we did the Jama'ah. No, it needs to be manifest. People need to know there's a Jama'ah taking place. It needs to be really obvious. So that's also a communal obligation. Why? Because we can't have a religion prosper unless the congregation is known. Allah tells us, He strongly encourages the believers to pray in the masajid, to pray in congregation, right? To do i'tikaf, for example. You can't do any of those things if the masjid's unknown, okay? Or if there's no masjid. So again, congregational prayer, for example, is a Farḍ Kifāya or a communal obligation that is related to the Muslims, their religious affairs. طيب, now another third one that's really good to know is the command of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. When Allah Ta'ala commands the Muslims to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. To enjoin the good and forbid the evil. So, every Muslim, every community has an obligation to make sure that the good is enjoined and the evil is forbidden. What that means is, basically, if we should encourage people to do good, and we should tell them to not do bad things. That's a communal obligation. Meaning, if, for example, if, for example, we live in a place where there are bad things happening. Okay? All right? For example, there are people who are, right, who are neglecting their prayer, or people who are not Muslim, right? Or people who are, for example, doing drugs or anything like that, right? We have a societal obligation to go and warn them about these things, that they shouldn't do these things, they're bad for them in this world and the next, and we should do it in a way that's wise, in a way that's beautiful, and bring them to Islam and to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a communal obligation. If every single person neglects to do this, we are all sinful, right? But as long as one person does it, that person is rewarded and the rest of the community is absolved. Similarly, right, enjoining the good, right? Encouraging people to come to the masjid, encouraging people to, to do plentiful good deeds, teaching our children and stuff, that's all what? Having institutions that do that, that's also a communal obligation. It's part of enjoining the good. So these are some examples of communal obligations that are related to religious prosperity, to flourishing religion on the face of the earth that leads to ultimately one having felicity in the next life. Like, what about some worldly obligations or obligations that are connected to our worldly lives? Some of these things, for example, are really important, right? Clothing and feeding the needy if zakah is not enough and if there is no Muslim treasury. That's a communal obligation. So if we have people who are needy, right? They don't have shelter, their needs aren't met, right? And the zakah that's being distributed is not enough, or it's not being distributed at all. Or, for example, the Muslim treasury, if there is one, is being misrun. Okay, in all these cases, whose obligation is it to help those people? It's the entire communities to get their acts together, get some money together, and support these people who are downtrodden. So this is an example as well of worldly affairs, that we can't just have people who are, like homeless, shelterless, feeling unsafe, without any food on their table. Why? Because it's not, the Sunnah of the Prophet doesn't incline towards that, right? We want people to have prosperous religious lives, right? To be people who are of the afterlife. And that's only done if someone's worldly affairs are taken care of. They have food on the table, they feel safe, they have shelter, they have clothing, and they have their needs met. Another obligation that is connected to our worldly affairs are occupations. Specific occupations are Farḍ Kifāya, or communal obligations. What would we do in a society? I know the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is doctors, right? What do we do in a society without doctors? Great, let me ask you a question. What would we do in a society without shoemakers? What would you wear, right? What would you do in a society without people who can make clothes, who can go and, they farm cotton or whatever, right? And they know how to spin it, they know how to dye it, they know how to, tailor clothing and sew it and everything. What would we do, right? We'd be at a loss. We'd be scrambling to cover ourselves. So every profession that is needed to have a sufficient worldly life, a flourishing worldly life, is also a Farḍ Kifāya, a communal obligation. Not just medicine, but everything. Even the shoemakers, the tailors, the farmers, the butchers, all these professions are communal obligations to fulfill. Okay? Another communal obligation is everything necessary or needed for the Muslims to have a complete and prosperous life. Okay? In terms of the worldly means. Because again, a complete and prosperous worldly life leads to what? Leads to a prosperous religious life. It doesn't mean that we have to be extravagant. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying just, we have to have our needs met, right? We need roads. We need schools. We need hospitals, right? We need markets to buy and sell, okay? All these things are necessary, right? It doesn't mean be extravagant, only focus on dunya, because, we have to get really, really, really high levels of dunya to reach levels of religion. No, we're just saying your needs must be met as a society in order to prosper in terms of religion. Because, again, if someone's worried about their life because they feel unsafe, there's no security in the country, for example, or they're worried about, their food, like they're hungry or something like that, they're destitute, then in that case, oftentimes, right, if someone is fearful of their life, okay, they might not even have to pray at all at that specific time, okay? They might not have to pray at all, and they can pray later once they feel safe, if they're, for example, in an active war zone or something like that. The point is, right? The point is that these are things that need to be accomplished, regardless of who does it. They need to be accomplished in order for the society to prosper and flourish. Amongst them as well is spreading sacred knowledge. Okay? It is a communal obligation to have people in the community who are communal resources, who are almost like deposits of this knowledge, right? They know enough such that everyone can come to them, ask them questions, get guidance when they need it, in order to make sure their lives are in line with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? Having those people present is a communal obligation. It's like how you need shoemakers and tailors and doctors. You need these kinds of people. People you can turn to and ask, is that allowed? Is that allowed? Is that not allowed? How do I pray? How do I fast? I did this. Is my prayer valid? Can you teach my kids how to read the Quran? Can you do this? Can you do that? That person is a communal obligation to produce. Okay? Furthermore, him or her spreading that knowledge is also a community obligation. To spread it to other people, right? To spread beyond what's Farḍ Ayn, right? To spread the extra knowledge that's beyond what all the basic stuff every Muslim needs to know. That's also a Farḍ Kifāya, communal obligation. So basically, they're going to train people to take their roles eventually once they get older or pass away. Just like how a doctor is constantly training younger people to help and fill the ranks. So these are just some examples of Farḍ Kifāya, of what's considered a communal obligation of Farḍ Kifāya in this religion. Now, we spoke about the differences. This begs us to ask now, which one is better? Right? Which one is better? What does better mean? And the person who fulfills a Farḍ Kifāya, is that better, so to speak? Is fulfilling a Farḍ Kifāya better than fulfilling a Farḍ Ayn? Scholars have differed, right? On the one hand, some say, well, the person who fulfills a Farḍ Kifāya, the entire community owes him. He might have saved hundreds or thousands or even millions of people from being sinful. One person did that. That's great. That's such a high rank, okay? But on the other hand, some scholars say, well, Farḍ Ayn, the personal obligation, is so important, Allah wants every single person to do it. He wants it to get done by specific individuals even. Whereas Farḍ Kifāya, yeah, that person saved hundreds or thousands, right, from being sinful, but Allah just wants the action to be done. He doesn't really care who does it. So the relied upon position, is that Farḍ Ayn, fulfilling a Farḍ Ayn is still better than fulfilling a Farḍ Kifāya. There's a strong difference of opinion, but that's the relied upon position. Why? Because, like we said, Allah is so concerned about these personal obligations, He's made every single person do it. And no one else can do it on behalf of someone else. Whereas this other obligation, it's a communal one. As long as one person does it, they're fine. The whole community's fine. It doesn't matter who does it. One person has to do it, tamam, and that's it. So, with that said, fulfilling a personal obligation, a Farḍ Ayn, is better than fulfilling a Farḍ Kifāya, okay, a communal obligation. But the next question that gets asked is, who exactly has to do Farḍ Kifāya? Okay? Who exactly has to do it? Tamam? Again, scholars have differed. Some say that the command of performing Farḍ Kifāya becomes attached to every single person in the community. What does that mean? Imagine I'm standing up here and I have a deck of cards, of index cards, for example, right? And I write on these index cards, right, build a hospital, okay? Or build a masjid or something like that. It's a command, right? It's a command. I pass them out to every single person in the room, all right? This is an example of the first opinion, which is that Farḍ Kifāya, a communal obligation, is attached to every single person in the community. Every single person has that card. Meaning what? The command is directed toward every single person in the community. You guys all, every single person has heard me say, build a hospital or build a school, right? طيب. Some scholars say no, that's not the case. Some people receive the command. The command is attached to some individuals. So for example, I have my deck of cards. I just give it to 10 people in the room. The first row, for example, okay? The first row in front of me, I give them cards. No one else, I don't give anyone else cards. They heard me give them the command, They know I gave them cards. They know what the cards say, right? But they weren't given cards. The task wasn't necessarily assigned to them as a community, so to speak. It was only assigned to the first row, the 10 people or so, right, to do on behalf of the community. All right? In this case, are they the only ones who can do it? No, anyone else can do it, right? It's almost like a debt. If I have a debt to so-and-so, I can pay off my debt. Or Abdullah can come and pay off the debt for me. Hey, I heard Uzaid has a debt to you. I'm going to pay it off for him. Okay? Great. So it's like a debt. Those people who receive the cards, they're the ones who have to fulfill this command. They can perform it themselves, or anyone else in the community can perform it. Okay? And if anyone else in the community performs it, it's like they are paying off a debt between that first row in Allah, so to speak. Okay? Between those specific people in Allah, so to speak. Okay? Some scholars say, no, that's not the case either. Okay? It's attached to, right? The command for communal obligation is attached to a group of people that are completely unknown. All right? And then once that action is performed, then we realize, oh, they're the ones who receive the cards. They're the ones who receive the commands, right? So imagine, right? I have my deck of cards, build a hospital, build a school, whatever, okay? And I just hand them out to a few people, or hand out cards to everyone, let's say, right? And some people's cards say, build a hospital, or build a masjid, right? Okay, when are we gonna know who received those specific cards? When we see the actual hospital being built. Once we see who builds the hospital, then we know, oh, they're the ones who got the card. They're the ones who got the card for build a hospital, okay? So when these are different, the scholars have differed as to who exactly receives the command from Allah Ta'ala, who is obligated to, who does the command attach to, so to speak, okay? The relied upon position of the school, of the scholars, is that it is received by every single person, okay? It is received by every single person, okay? So every single person received the card. Every single person has the command attached to them. And that's the only thing that makes sense, right? Because if it doesn't get done, what happens? We said every single person gets sinful, okay? If I don't receive a card or command from God, okay, to do something, and then it gets neglected and not done, right? How could you be considered sinful, right? How could you be considered sinful if you never actually received the command? And so, Farḍ Kifāya, the communal obligation, goes to every single person in the community. All it takes is one person to do it and absolve everyone. And if they all neglect it, what happens? Every single person in the community is sinful. Every single person in the community is sinful. طيب. Just like how we have communal obligations and personal obligations, we have personal sunnahs and communal sunnahs. So sunnah ainiyah, was sunnah kifāya. In Arabic, sunnah ainiyah, a personal sunnah, and a communal sunnah, sunnah kifāya. Okay? What's a personal sunnah? For example, you have to pray. For example, you should pray that sunnahs before Maghrib and after Maghrib. The sunnahs before Isha and after Isha, right? Making dhikr generally throughout the day is sunnah. Paying charity, right? Giving sadaqah is sunnah. Having a smile on your face is sunnah, right? These are things that no one else can do on your behalf. Every Muslim is encouraged to do it, okay? And if they do it, what happens? They get reward that helps them in this life and the next, okay? Now we have what are also called sunnah kifāya, communal sunnahs. What are some communal sunnahs? For example, okay, someone sneezes, right, in a group. We have here maybe like 100 people, okay, or 50 people. One person sneezes. It's sunnah to tell that person, yarhamukallah, right? Does every single person need to say it? We're going to hear 40 or 50 voices all saying yarhamukallah. No. As long as one person in the entire group does it, they fulfilled the sunnah tamam on behalf of everyone. Meaning what? They're rewarded again, right? They're rewarded. They're rewarded on behalf of the entire group, okay? Another example, right, is, for example, if you're eating in a group. If you're eating in a group, okay, let's say there's 4 or 5 of us sitting together sharing a plate, sharing a meal. Okay, as we all know, the Prophet ﷺ said in hadith that when you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim before you eat, what happens? Your sustenance is protected from the shaitan. Meaning, if you don't say Bismillah before you eat, shaitan has a hand in what you eat. He participates in your eating, right? He participates in your eating, okay? So, as long as one person in the group that's eating together says Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, says Bismillah, everyone in the group, tamam, gets the protection offered by that Bismillah while they eat. That person, only that person is rewarded, but the protection of eating, having their food, protected from shaitan, is garnered. Everyone gets it, even though only one person actually articulated and said Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, in summary, right, we have Farḍ Ayn and Farḍ Kifāya, personal obligations that Allah legislates to test people. An action has to be performed by a specific individual. Okay? Then you have Farḍ Kifāya, communal obligations. Allah has legislated them to make sure the community runs smoothly. Its religious and its worldly life is structured, it's prosperous, it facilitates a good afterlife. Okay? These actions, right? Allah it doesn't matter who does them. As long as one person in the community does it, that person gets rewarded and everyone else is absolved. If everyone neglects it, what happens? Every single person in the community is sinful. And we said some of these actions are what? Religious, tamam, to make sure religion is prospering, like the jama'ah, the congregation, like having people, resources of sacred sciences around who spread it to the rest of the community. Alhamdulillah. And worldly affairs as well, making sure there are roads, making sure there are hospitals, making sure there are shoemakers and tailors and farmers. All these things are all present to make sure that people's lives are running smoothly, right? Running smoothly. No one is feeling, no one is scared to death. No one is worried about, where they're going to get clothes or food. You need these structures and things structured in society to make sure that everything is running smoothly. Okay, to make sure everything is running smoothly. With that said, we have a few minutes left for questions if you guys want to ask anything. Tfaddal. Abdullah.
When you say that everyone is sinful, that no one doesn't that includes like children and slaves?
So he mentioned everyone is sinful. Is everyone sinful? Literally everyone, if no one does the Farḍ Kifāya? It depends, right? So obviously, children are not considered legally responsible. They're not mukallaf, okay? Slaves also, for many issues, are not considered to be, are not obligated to do anything, okay? It depends on the issue, right? For some things, it might just be the men, okay? The men who are obligated to perform this thing as a communal obligation. For example, the jama'ah, the congregation, the men of the community, the men, they have reached puberty, they're free men. They're the ones who are commanded to do this. And for some things, it's everyone in the community. So even if, for example, a woman comes and washes a body and shrouds it and buries it and prays over it, and it can count. Okay? Yes. So he asked now, what happens if someone, for example, if they're eating in a group, they say Bismillah, right? But their intention is only to do it for themselves, not for the group. They're selfish, right? It still counts for the group because what Allah wants is just the action to occur, regardless of what? Of who did it. Okay? Wallahu a'lam. Tfaddal. Yeah.
In terms of why not Lehigh Valley means a hospital, not Makunji, or let alone the neighborhood, right? Who determines those boundaries? Who determines what's needed, and to what extent something is needed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So he's asking. It seems to him that Farḍ Kifāya is very abstract, especially in terms of defining what exactly community is. Right? That's more exactly what you're asking, right? Defining exactly what the community is. Is it Makunji? Is it Alberta as well? It's right down the street, you know? Is it Lehigh Valley? Is it Pennsylvania? It depends from issue to issue, right? It depends from issue to issue, right? So for example, a lot of these Farḍ Kifāya things, when it comes down to community, so typically back in the day, villages and towns or cities were set up such that once you exited the village or the town or the city, you would just be in wilderness. No one else would be living there, right? Maybe some farms here and there, right? And that's what they would mean in terms of community. That community, that city, that town, and that village or that village is what's held responsible, okay? Now, that's one thing, right? In our modern terms, the city and towns have grown so much, they're all connected almost, right? So, it's a bit different looking at it depending on the issue, but usually probably you can say like in terms of this, if we were to take the opinion that political boundaries define villages and towns and cities, it'd be a political boundary, right? For many issues, but not all of them. For some it'd be wider than that. For some it'd be less than that. Okay?
Is it the community that determines that? Is it the leaders of
The political boundaries.
Yeah, like for any given issue, right? Like,
So it's all documented. So everything, the boundaries for specific issues, what defines community and specific issues are documented in the books of fiqh. Yeah, so for each issue, you just have to look it up. Now, in terms of what exactly a political boundary means, it just means the boundaries defined by the ruling people of that community, right? So for example, Makandri's boundary is known, wherever it starts and wherever it ends. Alberta's boundary is known, right? Wherever it starts and wherever it ends. Yeah. Yeah.
So, when it comes to the paradigm, amount of knowledge, is that amount of knowledge, does that amount of knowledge differ between a layman and a student of knowledge, or is it all the same for everyone?
He's asking in terms of the Farḍ Ayn or personal obligatory knowledge, is it different from person to person? Is it different for a layman versus student knowledge? No. So a layman, so everyone has typically about the same Farḍ Ayn, so to speak. A student of knowledge is someone who's delving into what's a communal obligation to know. Okay? So if someone hasn't delved into that yet, they're typically not considered a student of knowledge. Yeah. Yes.
for how does the awareness thing work? For example, if you're unaware of a death and there's no scenario for the harm, are you still considered sinful if it's in the community?
So if you're not, he asked, what about if you're not aware of something? So you're not aware someone passed away. So if you're not aware of something, okay, if you're not aware of something, then you are not held accountable for it, okay? So, but if you're the only one aware of it, then now you have to do it, right? Let's pretend, for example, right, that someone, for example, someone lives somewhere and it's kind of remote and another Muslim there with them dies, okay? It's just them two, right? You can't just wait around saying, oh, it's a Farḍ Kifāya, someone's going to come around and do it, right? No, he has to do it. Like, no one else knows except for them. You got to do it, right? So it does depend based on who knows. Who knows? Yeah. Yes?
Two questions, inshallah. So one, I'm following what was just asked and answered then. Is there, say for example, our community, is there not a responsibility to be aware?
Yeah.
Like, you can't say we're in the middle of nowhere here. You can say we're somewhat remote, but you can't say we're not aware of each other, for example.
Right. He's asking, is there a responsibility to be aware? There is a responsibility to be aware, right? The example I was giving was basically imagine people just live in the woods, middle of nowhere, But there's a responsibility to be aware. You should know what the Muslims are going through, right? Sometimes you just can't help it, right? Like in a lot of Muslim societies, when someone passes away, right? Khalas, it's known who washes, who shrouds, who prepares them for burial. You just call those people that come and do it, right? But it could be where that might happen and you have no idea that happened. Okay, but in the case where general needs of the community are usually well known and one should be aware of them. You should know what the community needs, for example, a teacher or a masjid or this or that to facilitate its affairs. Yes, you shouldn't willingly keep yourself in the dark, such that you avoid all responsibility. That's not a positive thing to do. Okay, yeah, you follow up? Yeah.
Also, what about the Bismillah? If I understood the way it was expressed, that one person in a group accomplishes also the spiritual protection.
Yes.
So how do we understand properly the hadith and the Shama'al about it, where, if I remember correctly, it seems to indicate otherwise about the group, like where the Prophet ﷺ, if said there's a companion
Mhm.
and he didn't say the Bismillah, so all of it was gone in 2 bites, and he said, if you had said, so how do we juxtapose that understanding?
So the brother's asking, he understood that that protection, for example, given by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim when you're eating in a group, if one person does it, the entire group's protected, right? And how that is understood with the hadith where the companion comes late and joins them later. You can say, for example, perhaps he wasn't there when they said it. He joined late, right? He joined late. Is that the hadith you're talking about?
No. I think it's that, I can pull it and find it.
You can show me later, yeah.
He didn't say it. The one who came didn't say it and gobbled up everything in 2 bites. And then the Prophet said, had he said Bismillah, you would have been protected, indicating that he himself, regardless, was protected. So at least that's what the
Okay.
explanation in the margin about it. And so I'm just trying to.
Do you want to show me later? Yeah, I'll look at it together later. Okay. Sean.
You alluded to how occupations can fulfill Farḍ Kifāya.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, like going to the contemporary time, a lot of occupations are built within like a system.
Mhm.
We call it capitalism.
Mhm.
And within this capitalistic system, there are areas that are very clearly haram or could be potentially harmful to the family, community, or the planet, as an example.
Okay.
Can these types of corporations, because they're fulfilling a lot of these needs, to provide order in society and sort of flourishing and survival, as you mentioned, can these corporations, if deemed evil or deemed unjust or oppressive, can they actually fulfill the Farḍ Kifāya of the Muslim community that live in that system?
So he's saying, can the communal obligation that rests upon the Muslims be fulfilled by potentially corporations that are unjust or have bad intentions behind them, right?
Like they're building shoes, for example, but that
Yeah.
shoe company is like using,
Child labor and things like that. Yeah. Okay. To a degree, yes, there's a fulfillment, right? But the Muslim community is also encouraged to be self-sufficient. Okay, is also encouraged to be self-sufficient and to rely on itself and not people outside of it. You know what I mean? So to a degree, yes, there is a fulfillment, and we have examples of that in history. Like Muslims would do trade with other people, and sometimes they were not Muslim, and receive goods and services, right? But to have Muslims do those things is vastly superior. Is vastly superior. Yeah.
like the realm of like sinning, like being relieved of sin.
So in the terms of being relieved of sin, yeah, those services are being offered. Yeah, they're being offered. Okay?
Would you say like if we would be more self-sufficient in these aspects, would that be more like a sunnah?
He's saying if we were to stand and do these things, these obligations on our own, even if they're already being provided by non-Muslims, is that a sunnah? It's definitely better. I'm just hesitant to use the word sunnah without looking into it more. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she's asking, the community needs something like a well, for example, and no one's qualified to do it, right? It takes a lot of time to get qualified, to get training, so they get someone else to come and do it for them. Is the community absolved? They are absolved because the action's done. So what the community has to do is make sure it just gets done, whether that means bringing someone in or sending someone out to learn it. Okay? Yeah. Yes.
Just to follow up on Sean's question, if there is a Muslim that is able to provide the service, like at a reasonable expense, because sometimes like if it's an independent business, like just by necessity the prices are a lot higher.
Yeah.
It might be kind of like a burden on people. But let's say if there was a Muslim that was able to keep the prices comparative, is there then an imperative on the Muslim to buy from the Muslim rather than the non-Muslim?
Yeah. So he's asking, what happens if, for example, a Muslim tries to fulfill this service, like they own a shop that sells meat, for example, or like groceries or something, right? And is it imperative for the Muslims to buy from him if he's providing the goods at a reasonable rate? So let's look at it this way. Sometimes the independent business can compete with the big box companies, right? But their prices are still reasonable for what they're offering, okay? Everyone knows if you go to the corner shop, you're gonna get a different price than going to like Walmart, okay? But if what they're offering are reasonable prices, right, they should definitely support them, 100%, right? Obviously, if you can't afford it, it's okay. But if you can afford it, you should definitely support them. Because it means your money, who's your money going to? It's going to another Muslim, right? Their business is gonna grow. You know they're gonna take your money and not spend it on things that are haram, inshallah, right? It's money staying in the community and ultimately gonna make the community grow, okay? As opposed to if, for example, the Muslim who owns his business has ridiculous prices, in which case he's just cheating the community, right? That person should be given really proper nasiha, right? Proper nasiha, okay? All right? Yes, yes. It would not necessarily be an obligation, but it goes back to the idea of self-sufficiency. The Muslim ummah should be self-sufficient, right? Self-sufficient. Yes. So she's asking if you know that a specific community or corporation or company is producing goods or services unethically in a way that's haram, for example, whether it's fast fashion or even fast food, right, or something like that, right? Do you have to avoid them? Is that your question? Do you have to avoid giving them your money? If you know for sure that the money you're giving them or your reason for the money you're giving them is going to go towards something impermissible, okay, then you can't support them. You can't engage in that transaction. If you're unsure, right, it might happen, it might not, it becomes makruh, it becomes disliked, okay? So the reality of it is that a lot of these companies, if we were to really think about it, the money you give them gets thrown in a big pot, it gets mixed around with other cash. Some of it might go to their employees. The clerk you're dealing with when you buy from them, he has a wage, right? And he's doing honest work, he's just selling, you know what I mean? So it's not necessarily haram, so to speak, unless you know the money you're giving them, this money is going to be used in a haram way. And it goes back to a lot to what we're talking about, like when you're trying to be like ethical, right, as a Muslim, and stay away from the haram, even like the dust of the haram, right? So if you imagine, for example, if there was symbolically, if haram was like a storm, right, and it's kicking up dust, the dust isn't part of the storm, but you want to stay away from the dust, right? Even to stay away from that is virtuous and noble. Even staying away from that is virtuous and noble. Okay? But what we should be careful about is shaming people for doing things that are not haram. Right? So if someone, for example, can't, support a local Muslim business because they just can't afford the prices, even though the prices are reasonable, right? And they might shop somewhere, right, out of necessity, khalas, we shouldn't shame them or make them feel bad. One day they'll shift over. One day. Yes. He's asking what is the Farḍ of sacred knowledge that every Muslim needs to know. Farḍ of sacred knowledge is it is to know what is obligatory upon you, how to practice it. So everyone has to pray, fast, and give zakah if they have enough money, go on hajj if they're able to. And you have to know the rulings and how to perform something before you actually do it. So the ruling of marriage before you get married, how to get married before you get married, the ruling of opening a specific business before you do it, how to go about it, and things like that. Okay? That's generally it. So we have to stop here because we are over time. And there's another class, inshallah, happening shortly. So we end with the fact that gives us tawfiq, to seek beneficial knowledge. Now we act upon it, he accepts those actions, he gives us tawfiq to spread all over the world. And he also rewards our teachers, our loved ones, and our shuyukh, and all those who have rights upon us. He makes us the apple of the eyes of the Prophet ﷺ and the Hadrat al-Nabi.